Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf nun vav. I've missed everybody, and I'm glad to be back. So let's get started and let's get going. Let me share my screen, and we will really get started. So today, yesterday, the fourth chapter of Avodah Zarah returned to the issue of yayin nesach, wine, which is worshipped or used in the worship process by idolaters, and from which benefit is prohibited. Now, not only so there's a biblical prohibition if it is actually used in idolatry, but rabbinically, this wine is prohibited to benefit from, even if it's just touched by a non-Jew. And the Mishnah that we talked about, yes, over the last day or so, notes that as soon as the grapes are crushed and descend into the cistern, then it's wine and it's considered processed and prohibited if touched by a non-Jew. So, on the other hand, the implication is, while it's still in the crushing vat, then it's not going to be prohibited. Now, we saw yesterday that Rav Huna said that that was the original opinion, and that there was a later opinion that says that actually, as soon as the wine flows out, then it's going to be prohibited. As soon as it sort of separates from the crushed grapes themselves, that's when it's going to be prohibited. So that's the background. So now the Gemara notes. So again, importantly, we go back to the original Mishnah, and the Mishnah said, as we read from the two dots on Nun Vav Amud Aleph, ve'eno, fourth line, ve'eno osa yayin nesech ad sheyared lebor. It can't become this wine that is a nesech, that is considered some kind of worship wine that's used in the worship process, until it goes in to the cistern, until it's been crushed, it's now all liquid, and it's ready to be to ferment and thereby become wine. Now, but the Gemara is now going to ask a question. The word in the Gemara is Vahatanya, but the Aleph in the Masoras Hashas changes it to Vahatanan because it's not a brisa that we're citing, but a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Maisros Perak Aleph Mishnah Zayin, where it says Yayin. When does wine become finished? When it, with respect to Meiser, Mishiyakafe, when it begins to float. Now, what exactly does that mean when it begins to float? Well, let's take a look at Rashi's third line down of the narrow lines, end of the line. Yayin Mishiyakafe, Havi Gomer Malacha. At that point, the processing of the work that's being done on it is complete. Li'inyan Meiser. When it comes to having to take Meiser. Now, what's the story with that? Is as follows. But while you're getting your produce out of your field, there is, let's go to the end and then we'll back up to the beginning. Once you have your produce fully processed, it is now tevel, because you have not yet separated the special gifts for the Kohen and the Levi, and for the poor people, or to bring to Yerushalayim. And so as a result, you're not allowed to eat it. You're not allowed to eat it even if you're just eating in passively, meaning if you're just going to say, oh, I just want one grape. One grape doesn't matter because I'm not making a meal of it. Even in that kind of what's known as a rye, non-fixed setting, you're not allowed to eat it. But on the other hand, before the processing is done, you are allowed to have that one grape. You are allowed to have, chew on that apple. You are allowed to have all these other, the fruit and vegetables, etc., to the extent that all of them are subject to Meiser, which is a debate. But in any event, we'll assume that the answer is yes. And so the point is that at that time, before the processing is done, you can't sit down for a full meal to the stuff, but you can have some you can taste it, make sure it's good, etc. And that's totally legitimate, and one can understand why, because it hasn't been finished processing, and so as a result, the obligation for you to share with others, it doesn't make sense even for that obligation to kick in until you're done with the processing. Nobody wants unprocessed food, and so too with the wine. Until it's finished processing, it's not going to be prohibited. But once Havigar, as back into this Rashi, Havigamar Malacha Le'inyan Meiser Liyaser Bo Shtia Sarai, that when it comes to drinking even a little bit, once the processing is done, then it's going to be prohibited to have any of it at all. And when does that happen? Well, that Mishnah says when something floats to the surface. Now, what is it that floats to the first surface? So the Rashi continues, Mishiyakape, what does that mean, Mishiyakape? Lashon Saf, it's a language of floating. Kamo kapet tehoma, the Masechah Sukkah, that we had the story in Masechah Sukkah of the underground waterings floating up to the top and potentially flooding the entire world. And so that was the word kapeh, same root as mishiyakape. And so shitzafun, and so now Rashi tells us what is it that's happening. Shitzafin hakartzanim alayayin. That I don't know whether this is in fact true, but but Rashi would know because he was a winemaker himself, that the skins of the grapes are somehow lighter and therefore will come to the top, less dense than the wine itself, and so they will float to the top. Kishehu nach babor, once the wine has settled in and rested in the cistern. And so that's the moment that the work is completed. Until that grape skin comes to the top of the vat, you're not going to of the cistern. You're not going to be subject to Trumas and Maasros, and presumably, similarly, it shouldn't be able to be considered wine with respect to a Yayin Nesach either. And so,
a worker in the a worker at the factory, or a worker in the field is picking the grapes. He can munch on that every now and then, or drink a little bit before it's processed.
That's exactly right. And indeed, the Torah specifically gives workers that right, to do exactly that. And so the point is that none of that is considered eating from Tevel, because the Trumas and Maasros are not obligated. So indeed, not only does it make sense from a perspective of not having you give to the Levi and Kohen something that's not finished processing, but it also makes sense because Hashem wants to enable workers to not be tempted by the produce that they're working with, and enable them to have some and to be able to eat some of it. Okay. So
is there a limit?
What?
I mean, is there not, so they can snack on it here, a few berries but can they eat a whole bushel for their lunch?
So that the Gemara talks about that. You don't have it like off the top of my head at the moment, but there are certain limits, and they can contract. There was a whole discussion of the extent to which they can contract that away. But so that we have this debate, because our Mishnah says that it becomes final when it goes into the cistern, and the Mishnah in Maasros says that it becomes final when the grape skins come to the surface. So Amar Rava lo kasha. Now note here that Rava does not answer that the law of Yayin Nesach is different than the law of Truma. That could have been his answer, and we will see other people are going to give that answer. So it's important to note, and we will come back to it, because he does not give that answer. So he says, Lo kasha, ha Rabbi Akiva, ha Rabbanan. One is Rabbi Akiva, and one is the rabbis. Titania, because we have a brisa. Now, 1 second. Yes, you know what? Now I realize I have a little typo in my notes. I'll have to fix it. Titania, Yayin Mishiyared Labor, Rabbi Akiva Omer Mishiyakape. So when it comes to wine, I'm sorry. The first comment is Yayin Mishiyared Labor. The Tanakama's opinion, and thereby the rabbi's opinion, is the fact that is that it when it comes to the uh, 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 when it comes to the wine, it becomes subject to Meiser once it goes into the cistern. And Rabbi Akiva says no, it's when it floats to when the scum floats to the surface. So our Mishnah, which said when it goes into the cistern, well, that's the rabbis. Everything fits. And the Bryce and the Mishnah over there in Maseches Maisros is based on Rabbi Akiva. So now they ask though, Ibailahu, Kipui Devor, O Kipui Dechavis. Well, what exactly is Rabbi Akiva's opinion? When we say that something has to float to the surface, if we go back to the Mishnah in Maisros, it says from the when something floats to the surface. So where? Surface of what? What is the container in which things are floating to the surface? Is it the original cistern, or is it after you processed it out of the cistern and put it into barrels and casks? Is that the situation? Is that what the time frame that we're talking about? So that's the Gemara's question on Rabbi Akiva's opinion. So Tashma, listen to what that Mishnah said all the way back there. So Yayim Mishiyakape. When it comes to wine, it goes when it floats to the surface. Afal Pisha Kipa, and even though it floated to the surface in the cistern, kolate minagat ha'elyona. You can still take from the upper press, meaning from where the grapes are crushed. That's the upper basin in which people are standing and crushing the grapes. Uminat sinor, and you can take it from the tube that takes the wine down into the cistern. Vishosa, and you can still drink from that, even though the wine in the cistern has separated, so that the skins have gone to the top. You can still drink from the crushing vat and from the pipe.
The whole process demands that tastings occur.
100%.
The whole
Absolutely.
process.
Absolutely. So now in second, Shema Mina, the fact that we would say that even after it separates, here again, it's quoting the same Mishnah. It does not say where the wine is when it separates, when something floats to the surface. But given the fact that we reference the upper press and the pipe that goes to the cistern, Shema Mina Kipui Debor Kamrinan, that shows that we're talking about that when we say that something floats to the surface, we're talking about the cistern. Shema Mina, that's in fact the case. And let's take a look at two Rashis. So this is the Rashi 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi on Nunvavim and Aleph. Va'aval pishakipa mashababor kolate minagat. What's in the cistern is separate from the press, from the basin, from the pressing basin, ha'el yonah, that's above it. Vishosa, and from there you can eat. So meaning that you can drink. So even though something has separated below in the cistern, you can drink from what is still in the press. Sha'oto shalo yarad labor, because that which hasn't gone down into the cistern, lo nigbar malachto, its work has not been finished. And then if we go one line down from two lines down from that, Shema Mina Kipui Debor Kamar Midikitani va'afal pi shekipa kolate min hagat. Since we said that even though it's now got floating stuff in it, you can still take from the press. De'i bechavios, if it was talking about the barrels, ma'in etzel gas. Why go back to the what does it tell us to go back to the press for? You could even read into this. You should go back to the cistern if it doesn't become final until the wine goes out of the cistern and into barrels, and the separation happens in the barrels. Well, then it for sure you could use the wine in the cistern. So the fact that we don't say the cistern and instead tell you to go up to the press shows that it's the separation is happening in the cistern. And so we've answered that question. So now the Gemara says, hey, you quoted a brisa that has a machlokus between the rabbis and Rabbi Akiva, that says that the rabbis say that the wine is finished as soon as it goes into the cistern, and Rabbi Akiva says that it's finished as soon as the skins separate to the surface. But v'hatani Rav Zvid b'devei Rabbi Oshaya, that Rav Zvid taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Oshaya the following brisa: Yayin mishayerid labor v'yikapeh, that when is wine finished, according to the Tanakama, namely the rabbis, it's finished when something floats to the surface. And Rabbi Akiva Omer, Misha Yishla Bechavios, when you bring it out and you put it into the casks. So now we have two different machlokot between Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis. In one, the rabbis say the wine is finished when it goes into the cistern. In the other, Rabbi Akiva says, the rabbis say it's finished when something goes to the surface. In one, Rabbi Akiva says it's finished when something goes to the surface. And in the other, it says it's finished when you pull it out and you put it into casks. So, Tartza nami laha kamaisa hachi. So you have to say, you know what? Rav Zvid's read of the brisa is correct, and our original citation of that brisa is not correct, and therefore the Mishnah in Maisros is not going according to Rabbi Akiva. It's going according to the Rabbanan. And so as a result, we now don't know who is our Mishnah going like. That's the question that we have. So we need to figure out that, because that seems to be a third opinion. So Yayin Mishayerid Liyabavi Yakape, that we have to say that the Tanakama says when is wine finished. So then that's going to be the rabbis, and that's the opinion that wine finishes only when it goes into the cistern. And Rabbi Akiva Omer Misha Yishla Bechavios, and Rabbi Akiva says that it becomes finished and subject to trumas and maestros when you put it into the casks themselves, into the barrels. So
how many parts do we have here? Yeah, a little confusing. There's a cistern, there's a vat, there's a chavit.
Okay, so let's
it's getting a little confusing because when it says ibailu, the question is keep with the bor or keep with the chavit. But then we've also introduced the wine press, the vat in front of above that. So that question,
so let's go
that's not even included in the question.
Okay, so let's go through the four pieces, and actually there are going to be five pieces. Okay, so let's go through them. So the top is where the grapes are crushed, okay, and that is referred to as the gat, okay, the gat ha'elyonah. That's the upper press. That's where the grapes are crushed. They then go through a pipe, which we refer to as the tzinor. Then from the tzinor, before they go into the vat, into the cistern, there is a filter. We're going to see the filter very shortly, but we haven't yet gotten to it. And then after it goes through the filter and catches all the big stuff, everything goes into the cistern, and then we'll still get some sediment settling and some things floating to the top.
That's the bor?
That's the bor, correct. The cistern is the bor. Bor is equal to cistern. And then after you're done, after it's processed in the cistern, so then you need to, the cistern will fill up. And so you take it from the cistern, you put it into barrels or casks, and that's where it's going to get stored and allowed to age and to ferment.
And
And
that's
so
the
that,
chavi. That's the
What's
chavi.
that?
and that's the chavet.
The vat and cistern are synonymous?
No, so sometimes I may have used the word vat for the upper press, but yes, the vat and the cistern should be the same, are synonymous. The vat is the bottom, the
Gotcha.
bottom, exactly. We should call the upper one, we'll call the upper one a basin, just because that's the way the Art Scroll translation uses as well. And so again, so we have
Well, that's a
crushing
got,
basin.
right? You have a got.
That's the
goes
gat,
on.
correct. So to use the Hebrew terms, we have the gat. The gat then goes to the tzinor. The tzinor then goes through a
Ganenet.
a strainer. Well, that the tzinor is the tube.
Right.
Then it goes to a strainer, which is called the gargusni,
Oh, it's a senenet.
which we haven't yet seen. And then it goes in to the bore, and then from the bore we move it to the
I would
chavis.
suppose
to
today the
chavios.
same basic thing.
Yeah, I presume.
I would
I mean,
presume.
it's there is a
no,
little bit
mechanical.
different because they've got it may, when it goes into the cistern, they may there may not be a separate place. It may go straight into vats now. I don't to where it's going to be
You have to go
aged, as
to the-
opposed to ending up in some open
You have to take
container.
a trip to the wine.
Yeah, we'll have to. That sounds like a good plan. And there's a kosher winery that gives
know, it
tours
must-
in well, I was referring to in
California.
California, but yes,
I
you're
would
absolutely
assume
right.
in Long Island too.
You're probably right. Maybe we should do that. All right. In any event, and so okay. So now we've said that our that the brisa is according and the two brisas need to be changed, and it's the rabbis who say that it's when that the wine is processed when the skins float to the surface, and Rabbi Akiva says it's when you draw it from the cask. But that leaves our Mishnah. Ve'elamas nisin de katani eno osa yayin nesach ajayeri labor. But one second, our Mishnah says that the wine is finished with respect to yayin nesach when it goes into the cistern, as soon as it goes into that pit vat cistern system. And so it doesn't have to have the things float to the top. So lema tlasa tanaihi, does this mean that in fact there are three different opinions about when things become finished with respect to maestros and trumos? No, not necessarily. Shiny yayin nesach ta'achmiru be rabbanan. No, we could change our answer. Again, Rava, we're now going to have to deal with in a moment because Rava didn't give this answer. But we can change and say that the answer is that wine for Yayin Nesech has a stricter rule. And so we are going to consider it finished as soon as that wine goes into the vat, into the cistern. And so that's the story. So now, as we turn to Nun Vav Amud Bet, the Gemara asks, 1 second though, Ula Rava delo shinile, but Rava didn't give this answer. He didn't make a distinction between Trumos and Maestros on the one hand and Yayin Nesek on the other hand. So how would he need to deal with it? So Mokim Le Kitlasa Tanai, he must hold that there are in fact three different Tanaim that determine what's considered finished with respect to Trumos and Maestros. And our Mishnah is not like either the rabbis or Rabbi Akiva that we see when it comes to Trumos and Maestros. Okay, so and let's take a look at Rashi, who explains this a little bit further. Ula Rava delo shani le mida osvina le'el meiser miyayin nesech. That when the fact that we asked the question about meiser from yayin nesech, demas nisin of our Mishnah. the Ushaniya Rava lo kashya. And Rava said, this is not any kind of question at all, because it's just two different opinions with respect to Trumas and Maestros. Alma, we see lo shani le, he did not make this distinction between Trumas and Maestros on the one hand and Yayin Nesek on the other. Because if he did make this distinction, Lema shiny Yayin Nesek, he should have said that Yayin Nesek is different. That the rabbis are more strict with it. So al korchach, so therefore moki la kitlasa tonight. There must be three Tanaic opinions according to Rava.
The Rava's not even addressing it. Yain Nesek, isn't he addressing Truma?
No, he was addressing the question, right? The question that got us on this conversation was the fact that our Mishnah says that wine is finished when it goes into the cistern, and a Mishnah in Maseches Maestros says that it's finished when the skins rise to the float to the top.
Right, but what about the issue of Truma or Maisa versus Yain Nesek?
He didn't make that distinction,
okay,
and that's why he must hold that there are three opinions with respect to when something is finished with respect to Trumas and Maestros. There's the position that is in our Mishnah here in Maseches Avodah Zarah. There's the position that's in the Mishnah in Maseches Maestros, and there's the position that's in the Brisa that we've now amended and is now consistent between the brisa that Reb Zera taught, that Reb Zid taught, and the brisa that we cited, which says that there's a third opinion that says that it's only when you take the wine and put it into casks that it is complete. Okay, so we said Mashe babor aser v'hasha'ar mutter, that what's in the cistern is going to be prohibited, and what's left before that, meaning every step earlier, is going to be permitted. Rav Huna. Now, we had Rav Huna yesterday, and yesterday Rav Huna taught that our Mishnah was actually only the original opinion, and I mentioned this in the introduction. But the final opinion is not that actually you have to wait for the wine to go into the cistern, but actually as soon as the wine, the liquid, leaves the grapes and flows away, as soon as that happens, as soon as you don't have a grape liquid mixture, but rather have anything that is just liquid, so then as soon as that happens, then it can become Yayin Nesech. And so as a result, that even when it's in the crushing vat, then it can still become Yayin Nesek. Again, that was what Rav Huna taught yesterday. So now what does Rav Huna teach us? Now, Amar Rav Huna, lo shanu ela shalo hechzer gargusni legas. That in addition, not only the only time that the mixture in the top vat, in the top basin, is going to be something that isn't Yayin Nesech, is when you don't take the stuff out of the strainer and bring it back into the basin to have it crush some more. If you do have it crush some more in the basin, well, then that's that now all of a sudden, for some reason, and we're going to have to figure out what the reason is. That's where we're going to go next. As soon as you take the stuff out of the strainer and put it back into the main basin, now it's going to be it's going to be considered something that could be Yayin Nesech. Aval hechzer gargusni legaz, if you do return it to the basin, asur, now it's going to be prohibited. Asur, what does that mean? Af mashe begas, even what's in the basin itself is going to be prohibited. So why is that? So gargusni gufa b'mai kamistzura mitasra. Why is the strainer going to be prohibited? Remember, the strainer, it goes through that before it goes into the vat, and so as a result, maybe there's nothing wrong with the the strainer. It's only when it goes into the vat, according to our Mishnah. And so, what's the story there? And so, this seems to be according to the Rav Huna's the initial understanding of our Mishnah. So, the Gemara suggests Shema Mina Nitzuk Chibur. Can we? So Benitzuk. Maybe we're going to say. So I skipped that word. Benitzuk. So Shema Mina Nitzuk Chibur. Maybe we're going to say it's the stream, because what happens? We have a constant flow. The constant flow goes from the vat, from the basin through the pipe to the strainer, and through the strainer into the cistern. And so the fact that we have that flow of a constant flow of liquid, we can say, hey, it's as if the bottom vat is touching the is touching the strainer. And so as a result, because the liquid goes in a steady stream from the strainer to the cistern, we can consider it as if they were touching. And therefore, just as the liquid in the cistern is problematic, so too the liquid that is touching the strainer is problematic. And so if I put any of the strainer back into the main basin, the crushing basin, so now I have brought with it some of that yayin nesech, and now that yayin nesech is going to make all of the contents of the basin prohibited. So that's
Isn't a strainer usually suspended over a pot or
yes, exactly.
So it's not touching the bottom of the strainer, is not actually touching the pot or the basin.
You're exactly right. At this moment, we're assuming that the strainer is not touching the liquid that's currently in the vat, but rather there is a stream, like a stream from your faucet, from the faucet end to the vat. And that stream can constitute a method of touching that makes the bottom, even though the flow is only in one direction from the top to the bottom, we're going to attribute somehow the yayin nesech up the flow to the strainer. That's exactly right.
Maybe it splashes upward.
No, we're not dealing with splashing. We're going to get to that in a moment. But we're not dealing with splashing. We're saying that it's actually just the stream. That's the hava amina. We'll get to the splashing in a moment. So no, we're going to reject that. It is not the stream. So again, let's take a look at Rashi. Benitzuk kiluach. It's a flow. Hayorin megargusni that goes from the strainer labor into the cistern. Umechaber hagargusni liyayin nezach shebabor, and connects the strainer to the wine that is in the yayin nesech, the prohibited wine that's in the cistern. Now, Tosos asked the question, and you may be thinking it too. Well, 1 second. Once we're going to connect the streams, well, then why do you need to even worry about putting the stuff from the strainer back into the main basin? The flow is all the way from the basin, from all the way at the top to the bottom. So let's go all the way through the strainer, through the pipe, up to the main basin. And so Tosos explains that no, we're not going to go through that. In fact, let's take a look at that Tosos. It's the third Tosos on the daf. Garguz, with just the first line of the Tosos. Garguzni guva b'may mitzara b'nitzuk shmami no nitzuk chibur v'im tomer im kain mashe begaz hayalanu la'asur b'tam nitzuk. Shouldn't the main basin also become prohibited because of the flow and not need you to put the strainer back in? So v'yesh lomer de shiny hacha. No, it's different. Dahavi nitzuk bar nitzuk. It's two separate flows. De megas legargusni havi nitzuk echad, because you have a flow from the strainer to the into the cistern. That's one. I'm sorry, from the from the press to the strainer is one. That's one flow. Umigargusni labor nitzach sheni. And then the flow from the strainer into the cistern is a second one. The idea being the following. Certainly in the strainers that they had, there was no direct path, meaning you would have a mesh that would effectively trap stuff in it. And so it is viewed, Tosos is suggesting, that we don't treat it as one long flow, even though it may on some level look like one flow, but because things essentially stop up at the strainer, it's not just a tube the way the the other tube, the way the what would we call it, the tzinor is a tube. It's not just a tube, but rather it's stopping things on the way. So as a result, we're going to treat it as two separate flows, and we will not necessarily connect one flow to the other, because after all, one, even connecting one to the next one, is a stringency, because the flow is going in one direction and we're treating the isser as going in the other direction.
One who studies anatomy could understand this. If, for instance, there's a flow from the kidney to the bladder, and then from the bladder to the urethra to the outside. So I can visualize this pretty easily from my my background.
Yeah, I get that. Certainly, that's one way to visualize it. All right, so again, our question is: doesn't this show that there's got to be a connection that based on the stream? And no, Kedatani Rabbi Chia. No, we can use Rabbi Chia's distinction, because Rabbi Chia in the Mishnah to explain a Mishnah on Ayin Bet Amud Aleph, he says shebechasato tzlochiso. It's where it splashes, it bangs, it's where it hits. And there we're talking about a funnel. The case there is a Jew poured wine through a funnel into an idolater's flask that contained some yayin nesachid in it. And then the Jew used that same funnel to pour wine into the Jew's own flask. So the wine in the Jew's flask is said to be prohibited. Somehow, something of the usage of that funnel from, even though the funnel was pouring kosher wine into a container that held non-kosher wine, somehow something got on that funnel and got transferred to the Jew's wine. And the Mishnah doesn't explain how it happens. And so Rabbi Chia says, it's because some of the wine that was in the non-Jew's flask must have come up and touched the backflow. Exactly. Backflow is a perfect word. Backflow up and touched the funnel. And so as a result, Hachanami, here too, Shipachasato Boro, the wine that was in the bore, that was in the cistern, will have backflowed and touched the wine, that touched the strainer. And so as a result, that's why that's going to be prohibited. As Rashi tells us, take a look at Rashi Shipachasato Boro, Shinis Male Habor, the cistern filled up so much, Ad Shehigia Hayayin, V'tipach B'shule Hagargusni, until it goes up and moistens the bottom of the strainer. And then we have this, and what is this word of Pichasa? So, Kamo Pichsa Bifaneha. We saw back on Membet Amud Aleph, and then the Mishnah later as well. Where's that Mishnah? The Mishnah was on Nun Gimel. That the point is that if you dent an idol, so that word Pichaso is to dent. So it's banging, it's hitting, it's exactly the splashback. It's along those lines of the splashback that Kenneth was referencing. So when it came to the various idols, and we said that the question was whether banging them is sufficient to nullify them, that word is also here is the root to b'chasato b'boro, that the wine is banging. The wine is banging against the strainer. Okay, so now we have two stories, and with these stories, we will conclude for the day. And my apologies for not scrolling. So I'll give you the scroll, and so that way you can see the first of the two stories, and then we'll scroll again to see the second story. So there was a kid who had learned Avodas Kochavim, namely Maseches Avodah Zarah, at 6 years old. So he's a smart kid. Bomine, they asked him, Mahu ledroch im ha'ovid kochavim bagas. What's the story about, in the end of the day, about treading with an idolater in a wine press? Meaning, a non-Jew comes and says, listen, I need some help. My 2 feet are not enough. I need 4 feet. I need you to come and help me crush the grapes with me. So are you allowed to do it? Because as soon as those grapes are crushed, maybe they become yayin nesech, and now you're helping him make yayin nesech, and you're not allowed to do that. You're facilitating something that's not good, something that's wrong. So
when we discussed this yesterday, we had some difficulty with this, and it seemed like the Jew hired the Gentile, and he didn't actually work with him, or vice versa. Maybe the Gentile, something like so. That's the way we resolved it, but there was a little confusing there.
Yeah, so my understanding is that they are working together. Or at least certainly in this case, they're working together. And I think in those cases also, they could be working together. It's important to remember that the final understanding based on that Gemara yesterday is different from our Mishnah. So you can't say, well, 1 second, our Mishnah says that it's only prohibited as yayin nesach when it goes into the cistern. That's right. Our Mishnah is different from the way we come out. In the end, as soon as the wine separates, it's possible for it to become yayin nesach. And so that's the position that's going to be said here. So boimine, and so they asked him, what's the rule if I want to get hired in order to serve as a presser for a non-Jew? Am I allowed to benefit from this? Okay, so Amar Lahu, he said to them, you are allowed to. 1 second, they asked back, Menasek bidei. But 1 second, maybe he's going to, while they're in the vat together, have some separate liquid, and he will touch it with his hands and thereby do a libation and thereby make it prohibited to benefit from. And then you will have facilitated him making something that's prohibited to benefit from, and and you're not allowed to do that. So how can you do that? How can you say, you kid, can you say that? So lahu lidei. No, we're dealing with a situation where his hands are tied, meaning on some level, it's a little bit of a far-fetched situation, but the non-Jew understands. He says, listen, I know that I can't hire you if my hands are available because you're concerned I'm going to make yayin nesech. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hire you because I need the extra feet, and I'm going to tie my hands behind my back so that way you know I'm not going to do any kind of yayin nesek while we're in the vat together, while we're in the basin, crushing basin together.
So he's touching the grapes with his feet, though.
Correct, 100%. And we're going to ask that right now. Well, 1 second, maybe he's going to use his feet in order to do a libation. And isn't that in and of itself problematic? And doesn't that mean that the whole wine in the vat is going to be problematic and therefore you can't do it with him? No. The child responds, Nisuk derego lo shmei nisuk. That kind of libation, that is not respectful, and as a result, nobody considers that a valid form of libation. And so where do we come out on all of this? Where we come out on this is the following.
That's kind of, when you say that, that's not respectful. We had all these Gemaras talking about defecating, urinating on, and
you're absolutely right.
Something.
You're absolutely right. And so the point is that at least to the knowledge of the Gemara, there isn't an idol whose worship format was to do libations with feet. You are absolutely right. If there was such an idol, we would have a problem. We would have a problem. You're absolutely right. But because there is no idol that specifically has libations with feet, that is why we don't have the problem. If in fact someone were to invent such an idol, then we would absolutely have a problem again, because then you're absolutely right. That would be a problem. But the moment there is no such the idol, and so as a result they're not aware of that, and so it's not going to be an issue. And so where we come out is the following: if the processing is being done by feet of Jews and non-Jews, and the non-Jews are not able to touch the wine with their hands, so then we're going to be okay. And that wine is going to be fine, at least at the moment. We're going to see some more according to this. According to the 6-year-old, according to that opinion. But let's take a look, because now we're going to have another situation. Hahu uvda dahavi benarda. There was a story. So we had one story. Now we're going to get to the second story. And so here's the second story. Hahu dahavi benarda. There was a situation in Narda. Dudasha Yisrael ba'ovikochavim lahu chamra. That a Jew and an idolater, they crushed the wine. Now, given our reference in the last story of the fact that the guy's hands were tied is the only situation where it's permitted, we're going to assume that the guy's hands were tied here. Vishahaye Shmuel tlasa rigle, and Shmuel held on for 3 holidays. He waited for 3 holidays. Why did he wait for 3 holidays? So Rashi tells us, Tlas Rigle, Shahayu miskabtzin lishmoa drasha, Hilchos Pesach lePesach, Hilchos Atzeres leAtzeres, Hilchos Chag leChag. Because he wanted to access the knowledge of the lessons that were going to be taught, of the drashot that were going to be taught about Pesach on Pesach, and access the people who were teaching those lessons. So my timer, why did he want to do that? So maybe you could say it's because he thought, as we turn to Zayin Amud Aleph, De'i Mishkachna Tana De'asar Karabi Nasan Osrine Afilu Bahana. Maybe he thinks that we should be stricter than this kid. That in fact, not only is the wine prohibited, but not only you can't drink it, but you're not even going to be allowed to benefit from that wine, meaning you can't even sell it to a non-Jew. And why would he think that there's an opinion that says that you can't sell it to a non-Jew? Because listen to how strict Rabbi Nassan is. Tanya, we have a brisa. Midado. If you have this brisa is talking about a Jewish merchant who has a non-Jewish customer. So midado, and the non-Jewish customer comes in and measures the wine. Bain biyad, bain beregel. And he measures the wine in the vat or in the barrel by literally sticking his hand into the wine. Because, of course, their sense of sanitary was a little different than ours. So they just stuck their hand in. How deep is it? Meaning, did you put a false floor above so it's really not anywhere near as deep as I think it is? And so he sticks his hand in. So according to the Tanakama, Yimacher,
or he sticks his foot in.
Or he sticks ben bereg, or he sticks his foot in. Either way, Yimacher, it needs to be sold. What does it mean? Yimacher, it can be sold. Rashi tells us first of let's go to the third line. First, we'll do midado. Rashi on midado, third line of the wide lines. Ovid kochavim, a non-Jew does the measuring. L'yayin shel Yisrael, of a wine that belongs to a Jew. Bain biyad, whether with his hand. What does that mean? Shehichnas yado. Uzro'o, he goes and sticks his hand and forearm into it. L'tocho, l'sha'ar kama yayin yeshbo, to figure out how much wine is in there. Kamosha osin bekana shekorin pila. So I don't know what that is, but the bottom line is that the point is that sticking his hand in, or he could stick his foot in to do the same thing. Yemacher, he can sell it. Dekavin delonis gavin lenesach, because although it was touched by a non-Jew, it's clear he had no intention to do any kind of libation. He wasn't worshiping. He was just sticking his hand in. So as a result, he needs to sell it, meaning you can't eat it. You can't drink it because we're going to say it's prohibited to drink from. Rabbi Nosson Omer, biyad aser. Not only can you not drink it, but if he used his hand, well, then it's going to be even forbidden to sell. You're not going to benefit from it. So baregel mutter, but with his foot it would be permitted. So what do we see? We see that Rabbi Nosson says that even when there's no intention, meaning here we have this guy who's been crushing the grapes with his feet, and his hands are tied behind his back, and so there can be no question that there was no intention to engage in any kind of idolatry worship with this wine, and so but yet nonetheless Rabbi Natan says that maybe the wine could be even forbidden and you're not allowed to benefit from it. So maybe Shmuel is trying to see whether we should paskin that way. No, that can't be, because Amar to Amar Rabbi
No, but
Nosson
it
miyad.
is mutar with the foot.
Exactly. That's exactly the Gemara's point. But Rabbi Nosson says that it's only with the hand that it would be permitted. Beregel miyamar, does he say anything with the foot? Of course not. He specifically says that you can sell it with the foot. So Ella de'imish kachna tana deshare. No, the question that Shmuel had is there somebody who even permits it for drinking? Rabbi Shimon, like Rabbi Shimon. We are going to see Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah on on Samech Amud Bet, that if a non-Jew, an idolater, falls into a cistern of wine, or he flicks an insect out of it, that the wine remains permitted to drink. Okay, and so as a result, according to Rabbi Shimon, it's clear that regular contact, when the intention is clearly not about doing some kind of libation, well, then the wine can still be drunk. And so the question that Shmuel had is, does anybody hold like Rabbi Shimon? So because Isharye afilu bishtia, because if there is somebody that holds like Rabbi Shimon, well, then I'll permit it even for drinking. As Rashi says, take a look at the Rashi, second line down, Rabbi Shimon, Deshari maga shel ovid kolchav mishalonis kavin l'nesach, that he permits the touching of a non-Jew of the wine if there's no intention for a libation. And he even allows it to be drunk. As we are going to see in the Mishnah. Again, this Mishnah is on Samach Amud Bet. Nafal labor va'ala. If you fall into the pit and you get out, into the cistern and you get out, that Rabbi Shimon matir. Rabbi Shimon says you could do it. It's permitted. Even with drinking. And yet, in the end, it seems that Shmuel did not find any such opinion that agrees with Rabbi Shimon, and therefore, in the end, we were going to say that in the case that the 6-year-old talked about, yes, you are allowed to crush the grapes with the non-Jew, but you are not allowed to drink that wine, because that wine must be sold. It's prohibited to drink from, but you're allowed to benefit from it. That seems to be where we are at the moment. Now, what happens if the idolater touches the wine, not with his hand, not with his foot, but with something that he's holding? That's the question that we're going to look at tomorrow. And so for the answer to that question, stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Yes, like a pole, like a pole.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so that's the question that we're going to start with tomorrow. So looking forward to continuing our learning together. Have a fabulous and wonderful day. Look wonderful to be back, and looking forward to continuing our learning together.
What if he drinks from? What if he touches it with his face and he just drinks from it?
Well, presumably his face is going to be treated, no different than his foot. So I think most, touching, other kinds of touching, is going to be somewhere between feet and hands. So depending on exactly what he touches with and how normal it is and what the potential usages are, so that's going to be the determining factor. But now we're going to go one level removed to see about touching with something.
I was in years ago. I was in store, in a very religious neighborhood, and they were very particular. They had non-Jewish workers in the store to help the stock the
Sure.
shelves. They were very particular that the non-Jew did not touch the bottle of wine that was closed, that he didn't bring it up from the storehouse. They all asked only Jews to go and touch bring up the bottles of wine to put them on the shelf. They were very particular.
We are going to see.
I think that's a chumrah.
I think so too. We are going to see the concept of a double cover. And that's the double cover is usually the wine stopper plus the foil that's around the wine cover. Some kind of, sometimes it's wax on some things, but the wine cover. So you're going to see that we're going to care that if it's double covered, so then that's going to be. But I can understand that when you want to make sure that everything's working well, that you may want to add additional stringencies to make sure that everything stays good according to everybody. So definitely think that that's probably a stringency, but we haven't yet seen those halachos of the double cover, and so we'll see. We'll have to take a look at that and see whether maybe there's a way that we could say that, yes, actually, if you hold this way, then you can see why that might be required. So we'll be, God willing, get a chance to take a look at that over the next couple of weeks.
I think of that. Sometimes if they had no one else, they would put it in a brown paper bag if they asked them to carry it. I think also, if I remember.
Well, if that's the case, then that it could be that because there's no second cover on the glass part of it, it's only on the opening. Maybe they feel like there needs to be a second cover for the glass part, and therefore, if you put it in a bag, that would enable a second cover. That's what I'm getting at in terms of trying to understand. Maybe that's the basis of the reason that you need to have two layers between the non-Jew and the wine, and that would be one possible explanation for why our traditional wine bottles might not be enough.
But yet in some restaurants you'll find that they allow the non-Jew to pour the wine. And I've asked about that sometime, and I said I would prefer to bring it to let me pour it. So
that is going to be the case with yayin mevushal. We haven't gotten to that topic at all yet.
Right, exactly.
And so that's because once it's considered mevushal, again, consistent with the idea that we're not aware of any idol worship that involves cruddy wine. So as a result, once it's become mevushal, it's considered not worthy of being libation. And yet you could still ask your question, well, what about all the idols that get worshipped in way worse ways than using bad wine? The answer is that we know those idols. There wasn't an idol, and thankfully we don't really have sort of new idols coming up today. So as a result, that's why we don't have additional strictures to my knowledge. But the point is that's why you're going to be allowed to do that. But we'll get. I think.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned. I'm not gonna, but I remember at our Sheva Brachot. This is a long time ago. There was a bottle of wine on the table, and the Rav picked it up and he says, "This is not mevushal. Let's keep it close to me."
Exactly.
And he said, "Let's keep it close so that just in case other people, we don't know, maybe there's a
correct
worker in the
exactly,
kitchen." So he says, "Keep it at the front of the table next to me."
Exactly. All right. Have a great day. Looking forward to continuing our learning tomorrow. Be well.